Helina Catherine stood frozen on the platform, the train's whistle fading into the distance like a final goodbye. The snow was falling fast now, thick flakes swirling in the wind, biting at her cheeks as she clutched her suitcase tightly. Her breath came out in visible clouds, and for a moment she could hardly believe this was her new life. She'd traveled all the way from Philadelphia to marry Mr. Edmund Pritchard in Holbrook, only to wake up at the wrong station. The platform was empty, save for the dusting of snow and her heart hammering in her chest. Fear and confusion twisted together, and as the snow deepened around her, she felt more alone than ever. Then, from the swirling storm, a man appeared on horseback, his dark eyes scanning her with quiet concern. His voice broke through the wind, soft but sure. "You're at the right place now." Helina blinked, momentarily startled by the sound of his voice cutting through the cold, the sharpness of it almost making her jump. Her hands tightened on the suitcase, and she instinctively took a small step back, but he didn't seem to mean any harm. He was tall, with a heavy sheepskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the weather. A pack mule trailed behind him, loaded with gear for the storm. He dismounted with a natural grace, his boots landing silently in the snow. The soft clink of spurs echoed in the silence, making her flinch. He was studying her with those dark eyes, eyes that held both curiosity and something else, something warmer. Concern, maybe. His gaze was direct, but not unkind. "You look about half frozen," he said, his voice a deep rumble that somehow seemed to slice through the icy winds. His eyes scanned her, noting the way she was bundled in a simple wool dress, too thin for this harsh weather, and the nervous look in her eyes. "That train's not coming back until tomorrow at the earliest, not in this weather." Helina could barely feel her fingers as she tried to speak, her teeth chattering too hard to make anything but a stammer. I fell asleep," she managed, her voice shaking. "Wrong station." He nodded slowly, his expression softening. Then he asked, "Where were you headed?" "Holbrook?" The word left her lips in a small, defeated whisper. Holbrook. She glanced down at the suitcase in her hands, a sudden wave of shame and panic flooding her. She was here, all alone. And this wasn't what she had imagined at all. Her chest tightened at the thought of Edmund Pritchard waiting in Holbrook, wondering where she had gone, and she could hardly bear the weight of the situation. The cowboy studied her for a long moment, then asked bluntly, "Mail-order bride?" Helina's heart skipped a beat. It had been clear enough, she supposed. A woman alone in a remote Arizona town, in the middle of a snowstorm, suitcase in hand. She nodded, keeping her gaze lowered. It was all so embarrassing. She'd gambled everything, left behind her family, her life in Philadelphia, for this new chance, and now here she was, stranded in the wrong place. The man seemed to understand more than he let on. A flicker of sympathy crossed his face. He stepped closer, his boots crunching on the snow with a purposeful rhythm. "This storm's only going to get worse," he said, his tone quiet but firm. "Eager doesn't have a proper hotel. There's just a boarding house, but it's full of miners who got stranded last week. The telegraph lines are down, so you can't even wire ahead to Holbrook. And even if they were up, nobody's going anywhere in this weather. You need shelter, food, and warmth. I can provide all three." Helina hesitated, her heart pounding. Her mind raced through the possibilities. What if this man was dangerous? What if she was about to make a terrible mistake? She was alone. She didn't know anyone here. "I can't just go with you," she said, voice soft and uncertain. But her body longed for warmth, for safety, for any kind of relief. "I don't even know you. I'm supposed to meet Mr. Pritchard in Holbrook." He interrupted her gently, his gaze steady. "Helina, is it? Quote." She blinked, surprised. "How did you know my name?" "Lucky guess," he said with a slight smile. "You look like a Helina." She could only manage a small, embarrassed smile in return. His smile seemed genuine, warm, and that made her trust him just a little. "You're not safe out here," he added, his voice softer now, but still with a certainty that made her stomach churn with both dread and relief. "Come on. I own a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. I'll get you somewhere warm, somewhere you can rest. You don't have to worry about anything else right now." Helina knew it was foolish, dangerous even, But in that moment, all her rational thoughts slipped away. She didn't know what else to do. The cold was unbearable, and she was utterly alone in the storm. Edmund, her promised future, seemed so far away now, like a dream fading with each passing second. She nodded slowly, the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. "All right," she said quietly, the words tasting foreign in her mouth. "Thank you, Mr. Jameson." The cowboy nodded in return. "Isaac," he said, a flicker of humor in his eyes. "No need for formality in a storm like this." Quote, he helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. The warmth of his body at her back was immediate, a strange comfort that made her shiver with a mixture of relief and something else she didn't want to think about. The mule, laden with supplies, trotted behind them, and the two of them rode out into the storm. The streets of Eager were nearly empty, the wind howling as the snow continued to fall, covering everything in a thick blanket of white. The sound of Isaac's boots on the horse's saddle was the only noise besides the storm, and for the first time since she'd stepped off the train, Helina felt a small flicker of something close to hope. They rode past the general store, the saloon, and a small church with its modest steeple. Only a few people were out in the weather, bringing in firewood or securing shutters, but most had already retreated inside. The snow was coming down so thick now that Helina could barely see more than 10 feet ahead. Her only guide was Isaac's steady hand on the reins, his calm presence cutting through the chaos of the storm. As they left the town behind and entered the open country, she couldn't help but think about how this was all happening so fast. She had come to Arizona with one plan, one future in mind, and now she was riding off into the unknown with a stranger, to a ranch she had never seen. "Where does this lead, Isaac?" she asked quietly, breaking the silence. "To somewhere warm," he said, his voice low but comforting. For the first time since the train had left her behind, Helina let herself believe it. Somewhere warm indeed. The ride seemed to last forever, though Helina knew it couldn't have been more than an hour. The snow came down in relentless sheets, and the wind howled, whipping at their faces as they rode through the thickening storm. Helina's fingers were frozen stiff, and her feet ached in her boots. Isaac, ever steady, guided the horse with the quiet assurance of a man accustomed to the wild. She could feel his warmth pressed against her back, an unspoken reassurance that somehow made her feel safer, even in this strange, uncertain place. They passed fields blanketed in snow, the land stretching out in all directions like an endless white canvas. The quiet of the wilderness was profound, an eerie contrast to the chaos of the storm. Helina thought about the life she had left behind. Her father, once a respected merchant, had died just 6 months ago, leaving her with nothing but debts and empty promises. She had taken the chance on the mail-order arrangement, desperate for a new life, for a future that felt more certain than the one she had been living. And yet, here she was, on the back of a stranger's horse, racing away from the future she had planned. Isaac's voice cut through the stillness. "You're quiet back there. How are you holding up?" Helina shifted slightly, trying to ignore the ache in her limbs. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding in, all that fear and confusion from earlier, and now, in the quiet of the storm, it all felt overwhelming. "I'm all right," she said, her voice small. "Just cold." Isaac gave a soft grunt of acknowledgement. "We're almost there. I have a cabin just up ahead, not far now." Helina nodded, though she wasn't sure he could see it. The snow made everything look the same. Endless and white, with no landmarks to guide her. She had no way of knowing how much time had passed, but the cold was starting to numb her senses. Her thoughts felt distant, as though the storm was erasing everything she had known, leaving her with only the present moment. As they rode on, Helina's mind wandered back to her promise to Edmund Pritchard. She had been so certain that marrying him was the right choice, that it was the safe, sensible choice. But now, after the long journey west and the sudden shock of everything falling apart, she wasn't so sure anymore. The idea of a life with Edmund, quiet, predictable, comfortable, didn't seem to fit anymore. She wasn't sure what she was searching for, but it felt like it wasn't in Holbrook with Mr. Pritchard. Isaac's voice broke through her thoughts once again. "The storm's fierce, but we'll get you settled soon. You'll be warm. That's the first thing we'll do. get you dry." Quote. She could feel the steadiness in his words and the way he spoke, like a man who knew exactly what needed to be done. Something about that calmed her, though she didn't understand why. She had no idea what his life was like, what he expected from her, or if he even expected anything at all. But he had helped her when she was lost and cold, and that, she realized, meant something. After what felt like an eternity, Isaac guided the horse up a slight hill, and the lights of a small building appeared in the distance. It was a modest structure, built of adobe and wood, with smoke rising from the chimney, a welcoming sight in the middle of the storm. "There we are," Isaac said. "Home, sweet home." Helina looked ahead, relieved but still wary. It was a humble house, far from the grand mansion she had imagined when she first dreamt of a new life in the West. But there was something comforting about the simplicity of it. It looked like a place where hard work and warmth were the currency of life, not riches or titles. Isaac dismounted first, then helped her down from the horse, his hand steady on her waist. The cold air hit her with a shock, and her legs nearly buckled beneath her, but Isaac was there, catching her before she fell. "Easy now," he said gently. "We'll get you inside." Helina didn't know if it was the exhaustion from the journey, the storm, or the unexpected kindness of this stranger, but she allowed herself to lean into him, trusting that he wouldn't let her fall. She felt the weight of the day's events settle into her bones. The long ride, the wrong station, the unexpected kindness, it all felt like a dream that might shatter at any moment. Isaac helped her up the steps and opened the door to the cabin. The warmth that greeted her was like a balm to her chilled skin. The interior was simple, just a single room with a potbelly stove in the corner, casting a soft glow on the wooden floor. There was a bed with a quilt draped over it, a sideboard with dishes and cooking supplies, and a small bookshelf lined with books. The scent of wood smoke and something hearty cooking lingered in the air. It was a humble, practical space, but it felt like a refuge. "Sit down," Isaac said, guiding her toward the stove. "You're probably starving and freezing. Let me take care of you." Helina felt a rush of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the cold. Isaac gave her a brief nod before turning to stoke the fire. "I'll get you a warm meal. You'll be fine here until the storm passes." She sank into a chair near the stove, the warmth from the fire slowly beginning to seep into her chilled body. For a moment, she simply closed her eyes, letting the heat wash over her. She didn't know where this path would lead, what would happen when the storm cleared, but for the first time since she had stepped off that train, she allowed herself to relax. Isaac moved about the cabin with ease, tending to the stove, pulling out some dried meat and beans, and setting them to cook. Helina watched him, her mind still spinning from everything that had happened. There was something about him, a quiet strength, a calmness that put her at ease. She felt an unexpected sense of safety in his presence, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was changing. Isaac glanced over his shoulder at her, catching her watching him. "I'm sure you have a lot of questions," he said, his tone light. Helina managed a small smile, feeling a flicker of warmth in her chest. "I do," she admitted softly, "but I think I need to rest first. I'll ask when I'm not so tired." Isaac gave a small chuckle and returned to his cooking. "Take your time, Helina. You've had a rough day." "I won't rush you." Helina leaned back in the chair, letting the warmth of the fire wrap around her like a blanket. For the first time in a long while, she felt the stirrings of something other than fear or uncertainty. She didn't know where this journey would take her, but for now, in this moment, she was safe. The storm continued through the night, a fierce howl against the walls of Isaac's cabin. Helina had fallen asleep by the stove, wrapped in a thick quilt Isaac had draped around her shoulders. She awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of the wind still howling outside, a soft light beginning to filter through the single window. The fire had burned low, but the warmth of the cabin remained, and Isaac was already up, moving about the room with quiet purpose. His broad back was turned to her as he stoked the fire, adding more wood to keep the warmth flowing. "Morning," he said, his voice low but steady. "Storm's still going strong. We won't be going anywhere today." Helina sat up slowly, the weight of the quilt falling from her shoulders as she stretched her stiff limbs. She'd never been so tired in her life, but the warmth and the steady presence of Isaac had provided her a kind of rest that had been missing for a long time. She felt safe here in a way she hadn't expected. "Morning," she replied, her voice still a little hoarse from the cold. I think I slept better than I've slept in months." Quote. Isaac gave a quiet chuckle as he moved to the table, pulling a pot of cornmeal mush off the stove. "Good, you needed it. You've had quite the journey." Helina nodded, grateful but reluctant to dwell on the details of the long trip and the shock of arriving at the wrong station. She had hoped the distance between her old life and this new one would bring some kind of clarity, but instead, it only seemed to deepen her confusion. "I'm sorry for the trouble I've caused," she said, her voice soft. "I never meant for any of this." Isaac turned to her, his dark eyes steady. "You haven't caused any trouble, Helina. Just a turn of bad luck in a storm. You'll be safe here until it passes. You don't need to worry about anything else." She looked at him, searching his face for signs of doubt, but there were none. He was as solid as the land itself, and there was a quiet sincerity in his voice that made her feel something. Not just gratitude, but something deeper. Something that made her wonder if she had made the right decision in trusting him. Isaac set the pot of mush on the table and poured 2 cups of coffee, sliding one toward her. "Eat. You'll feel better after a good meal. After that, you can tell me what you plan to do." Helina picked up the spoon and took a tentative bite, savoring the warmth of the food in her mouth. It was simple, but it was filling, and it made her feel more grounded, more alive than she had in a long time. She couldn't remember the last time she had eaten without worry gnawing at her thoughts. Isaac sat across from her, his coffee cup in his hands as he watched her quietly. His presence was steadying, a contrast to the chaos that had led her to this place. "You don't have to make any decisions right now," he said, breaking the silence. "You've been through a lot in the past few days. Let's just get through today, and then we'll figure things out." Helina nodded, her mind racing as she tried to process everything. She thought about Edmund, waiting for her in Holbrook. She thought about her father who had died so suddenly, leaving her alone in the world. She thought about the life she had hoped to build, a life of security, of being wanted. And now she was here, in the middle of nowhere, with a stranger who had offered her warmth and safety. Could she really marry Edmund? Was that life still what she wanted? But when she looked at Isaac, there was something in his steady gaze that made her heart flutter, something she couldn't explain. He wasn't like Edmund. He wasn't refined or wealthy or secure. But there was something raw and real about him, something that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Isaac leaned back in his chair, his hands resting on the table. "Tell me about yourself, Helina. What made you decide to take that long train ride across the country? What were you looking for?" Her heart skipped a beat at the question. She had told herself she was running toward a better future, a life with Edmund. But as she sat there, under Isaac's gaze, the words felt hollow. I thought I was looking for security," she said slowly, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with her finger. "I thought I wanted a safe life, a life where I wouldn't have to worry about what came next. But now—" Her voice trailed off and she looked away, not sure how to finish the thought. Isaac didn't push her, didn't ask her to explain further. Instead, he simply nodded, his expression understanding. "We all look for different things. Security, love, purpose. I think we're all just trying to find a place where we belong." Helina's breath caught at his words. She wasn't sure why, but there was a vulnerability in him that mirrored her own. He had lost someone, his wife Sarah, he had mentioned. And maybe that was why he understood what she was going through, why he wasn't pressuring her to make a decision about her future. "I know it's hard to find the right place," Isaac continued, his voice softer now. "But sometimes the right place finds you, even when you're not looking for it." Helina looked at him, feeling the weight of his words settle deep inside her. She had come to Arizona looking for something, she wasn't sure what. But now, after everything that had happened, she found herself questioning whether it was a life with Edmund she truly wanted, or if it was something else. She had come to the wrong station, that much was clear. But maybe, just maybe, she had arrived at the right place now. Isaac smiled, as though sensing the change in her. "You're not the first person to take a wrong turn in life," he said, his voice laced with kindness. But the important thing is that you found your way here. And here, you're safe." The words hung in the air between them, the promise of something more, something yet to be discovered. Helina felt her heart shift, just a little, towards something she hadn't expected. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like she could breathe. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but in that moment, in Isaac's quiet presence, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope. The storm raged through the night, howling against the small cabin and blanketing the land in thick white silence. Helina woke several times, her body stiff from the cold, but each time, the warmth of the fire and Isaac's presence comforted her, allowing her to drift back into a troubled sleep. It felt like the world outside was frozen in time. Only the storm and the steady tick of the clock inside the cabin marked the passing of hours. By morning, the snow had begun to slow, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. The wind still howled occasionally, but the storm's worst was over. Helina woke early, as she had done every morning for as long as she could remember. Her body was trained to rise with the dawn, even when the nights felt endless. Isaac was already up, moving about the cabin with quiet purpose, adding more wood to the fire and setting water to boil. "Morning," he said, glancing up at her as she sat up from the bed. "Storm's nearly done. Should clear up this afternoon. Roads will be passable again." Helina nodded, feeling the weight of exhaustion in her bones. She had always prided herself on her ability to push through difficult circumstances, but this was different. She had been through too much in the last few days. Too many changes, too many unknowns. She had no idea what to do next. "I'm sorry again," she said, her voice low. "I didn't expect any of this. I thought I was coming to Hallbrook to meet Mr. Pritchard, and now I'm here with you. I don't even know what to think anymore." Isaac glanced at her over his shoulder, his expression steady. "You've been through a lot, Helina. No need to apologize. You didn't cause any of this." She gave a small, uncertain smile. "Still, it feels like a mess." Isaac walked over, offering her a mug of hot coffee. "Ain't nothing wrong with a mess if it gets you where you need to go." She accepted the coffee, wrapping her hands around the warm cup, feeling the heat sink into her chilled fingers. It was the simplest of comforts, but in that moment, it was everything. She stared into the mug, the steam curling up in front of her face. She hesitated, unsure if she could say the words. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I thought I knew, thought I had it all figured out, but it doesn't feel like what I imagined." Isaac sat down across from her, his dark eyes soft but knowing. "Ain't no shame in not having all the answers. We all get lost sometimes." Helina took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I came here to start a new life. To leave everything behind, my father's death, all the disappointments. And I thought, maybe if I found someone like Mr. Pritchard, maybe if I just kept moving forward, I could build something. But now I'm not so sure." "You came for security," Isaac said, his voice gentle, like he understood the weight of her words. "I get it. We all want something to hold on to." She looked up at him, surprised by his insight. "And you? Why did you come to Arizona?" Isaac leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant for a moment, as if recalling something from long ago. "I came for freedom. For a place where I could make my own way, where no one could tell me what to do or how to live. Arizona felt like the right place. I could build something here with my own hands." Helina nodded slowly. She had never thought about it that way. In her world, security was everything. Comfort, stability. But Isaac's world was different. He was building something from the ground up, relying on his own strength and will. "I admire that," she said quietly, "the way you've built this life on your own." Isaac gave her a small smile. "It ain't easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is." Helina's heart beat a little faster. She couldn't explain why, but the idea of building something, of having a place that truly belonged to her, was starting to seem like more than just a dream. It was something she could do, something she could create. They sat in silence for a moment, the crackle of the fire, the only sound between them. The weight of everything, her past, her uncertain future, was still pressing on her chest, but in Isaac's presence, it felt a little lighter, a little more manageable. Finally, Isaac spoke again. his tone casual but steady. "You don't have to decide anything right now. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. No pressure." Quote. Helina met his gaze, the quiet sincerity in his words stirring something deep within her. She had felt lost when she arrived in Eager, stranded in the wrong place, unsure of what to do next. But here, in this moment, with Isaac's steady presence and warmth, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this was the place she had been looking for all along. "I don't want to impose," she said, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty, "but if I stayed, I could help. I could find a way to contribute, help out around here." Isaac raised an eyebrow. "You mean like cook, clean, and do your part?" Helina nodded, feeling a small sense of pride at the idea of being useful, of not just being a guest but a part of something. "I can do more than just sit around." Isaac chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I didn't think you were the type to sit around." There was a moment of shared laughter, light and easy, and Helina felt a sense of ease settle between them. It was a simple thing, but it meant everything. She wasn't just some stranger anymore. She was starting to feel like she belonged here, with Isaac, in this small cabin that had already begun to feel like home. They spent the rest of the morning in easy conversation, sharing stories about their pasts. Isaac, his ranching life, and the loss of his wife, Sarah. Helina, her life back in Philadelphia, the struggle of losing her father, and the gamble she had taken with the mail-order bride arrangement. When Isaac stood to prepare the midday meal, Helina offered to help, surprising herself with the offer. The idea of contributing, of being part of something, felt right. It felt like she was moving toward a future she hadn't expected, but was willing to embrace. As Isaac busied himself with the stove, Helina looked around the cabin, the small, humble space that had become her sanctuary in the storm. She was still unsure of her future, but for the first time since she had stepped off the train, she felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't sure where this path would take her, but she was ready to follow it, step by step. Isaac glanced over at her, catching her eye. "You're doing all right?" he asked, his tone gentle. Helina met his gaze, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I'm doing better than I was yesterday." And for the first time, she truly believed it. The days passed in a quiet rhythm. The storm had finally cleared, leaving behind a world blanketed in snow, the sky a pale blue that seemed to stretch on forever. Isaac had gone back to work on the ranch, checking the animals, making sure the barn was holding up against the cold. Helina, for her part, had taken to the cabin with a quiet sense of purpose, unpacking her few belongings and cleaning up the space. It was simple, but it was hers now, and there was a peace in that. Isaac had been kind enough to show her around the ranch when the weather permitted. There was something about the vastness of the land that struck her. Endless stretches of open space, broken only by the rolling hills, the scattered grazing cattle, and the occasional outbuilding. Everything felt wide open, untamed, but in a way that was comforting, not daunting. She had never been one for city life. The hustle and bustle had always overwhelmed her. Here, in the silence of the desert, there was room to breathe. As the days turned into weeks, Helina began to settle into a routine. She cooked meals, tended to small chores around the cabin, and helped Isaac when he needed it. She wasn't sure what had drawn her to the ranch, whether it was the promise of peace or something in Isaac's steady presence, but she had started to feel like this was where she belonged. One evening, after a long day of work, Isaac had invited her to join him for dinner in the cabin. She'd been hesitant at first, uncertain of the boundaries between them, but he had made it clear, without words, that there was no need for formality. They ate together, talking about their lives, their pasts, and their futures. Isaac's quiet confidence and honesty were a sharp contrast to Edmund's calculated kindness, and it unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. She had spent so much time convincing herself that Edmund was the safe choice, the smart choice, but Isaac had already started to chip away at that certainty. "You're a long way from home," Isaac had said one night, after she'd shared more about her life in Philadelphia. "What made you decide to come out here?" Helina had paused, spooning some beans onto her plate, and tried to gather her thoughts. "I didn't really have a choice," she admitted. "My father died. His business failed and there was nothing left for me there. I thought maybe marrying Mr. Pritchard would be a way out. A new life. A fresh start. Isaac listened quietly, his dark eyes watching her with the kind of understanding that made her feel exposed. I see, he said softly. And what does that fresh start look like for you now? What do you want from all this? Quote. Helina was caught off guard by the question. She hadn't allowed herself to think too much about the future. Not in the way Isaac was asking. She had always assumed that security was what she needed. But now, sitting across from Isaac, she wasn't so sure anymore. I don't know, she admitted, her voice small. I thought I was looking for stability, but maybe what I really need is purpose. To feel like I'm part of something. Something real. Isaac leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. Purpose, huh? That's a good place to start. A lot of folks come out here looking for freedom or fortune. But sometimes, it's not about what you have. It's about what you make of what you're given. Helina stared at her plate, the weight of his words sinking in. She had spent so much time looking for a path that was already laid out for her. Safe, predictable. But now, as she looked around Isaac's ranch, she realized something. He had built this life himself, from the ground up. And that kind of independence, that kind of strength, was something she hadn't truly known before. Maybe that's what I need, she said softly, lifting her gaze to meet his. To build something for myself, not just wait for it to happen. Isaac smiled then, a small, knowing smile. I think you've already started. The next few days were filled with small tasks. Isaac had taken her out to check the cattle, showing her how to identify the healthy ones and make sure they had enough feed. Helina was surprised by how much she enjoyed it. The physical work, the connection to the land. It wasn't easy, but it felt like something she could do, something she could learn. At night, they shared meals together, sitting side by side at the small table by the fire. Isaac's quiet presence was a constant, but so was his kindness. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people, both carrying their own burdens, coming together for a meal and a conversation. It was simple, but it felt like something real, something worth building on. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and the fire crackled in the stove, Isaac broke the silence. You've been here a while now, he said, his voice steady. You've been helping me around the ranch and you've gotten used to the place. I think it's time you decided what comes next. Quote. Helina looked up from her plate, surprised by the question. What do you mean? Isaac shrugged, leaning back in his chair. I think you've earned the right to make a choice. You don't have to stay here. You don't have to go back to Hallbrook. But you have to decide what kind of life you want, and what kind of life you want to build. His words hung in the air between them, a challenge and an invitation all at once. Helina had thought about it a lot over the past few weeks, about her past, her future, and everything that had brought her here. She hadn't made a decision yet, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the future she had once envisioned for herself wasn't what she wanted anymore. It was something safer, yes, but something that left her feeling empty inside. I don't want to go back to Philadelphia, she said quietly, the words feeling like a weight lifted off her shoulders. I want to build a life here with something real, something I can call my own. Isaac's smile was slow, genuine. I think you'll fit in just fine here, Helina Catherine. The way he said her name made her heart beat a little faster, and she couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of certainty, a quiet understanding that this was where she was meant to be. As the fire flickered between them, Helina felt the weight of her past start to fade. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face it, ready to build something real, with Isaac, with the land, with herself. The days that followed were filled with work, laughter, and the growing sense that Helina had finally found the place where she truly belonged. The storm that had first brought her to Isaac's ranch had passed, but the experience had left an indelible mark on her heart. She had come here unsure of herself, unsure of what she was searching for, but now she was beginning to see what her future could be, a future shaped not by promises made from afar, but by the hard work of building something from the ground up. Isaac's ranch had become more than just a place of shelter. It had become a home. Helina had grown fond of the ranch life, of the long hours spent in the fields, checking on the cattle, mending fences, and learning to ride properly. Isaac was patient with her, teaching her everything he knew, but always letting her figure things out for herself. It wasn't easy work, but the satisfaction of seeing something completed, of knowing she had contributed, filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't realized was missing from her life. It was a stark contrast to the life she had imagined with Edmund Pritchard, a life of quiet comfort, but without the deep connection to something real. One afternoon, as they finished up a long day of work, Isaac invited her to join him for a ride through the valley. The sun was beginning to set, casting the land in hues of orange and purple, and the air had a crispness to it that only the desert could bring. "Let's take a ride," Isaac suggested, his eyes gleaming with quiet excitement. "The sun's about to set, and I thought you might want to see the valley from the ridge. It's a sight you won't forget." Helina hesitated for a moment, but something about his offer made her feel both nervous and eager. In the past, she had been so focused on what she thought she needed: security, comfort. But now, with Isaac, she was beginning to realize that what she wanted was something much deeper. She nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. "I'd love to." Isaac helped her onto her horse, his touch gentle, but with a quiet confidence that made her feel safe. As they rode side by side, the wind at their backs and the earth beneath them firm and steady, Helina's heart began to race, not from fear, but from a feeling she hadn't quite understood until now. It was the feeling of belonging. They made their way up the ridge, the land stretching out before them, vast and endless, as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky was awash in shades of gold and purple, and the world seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, it was just the two of them, alone with the land and the fading light. Isaac glanced over at her, his face softened by the dying sunlight. "You see it now, don't you?" he asked, his voice low. Helina nodded, her heart swelling with a feeling that caught her by surprise. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I never thought I'd find something like this." Isaac's smile was small but knowing. "There's a lot of beauty in this world if you're willing to look for it." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses, hooves steady beneath them. Helina felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She had spent so much of her life trying to fit into a life that wasn't hers, trying to please others, trying to find something she couldn't even name. But here, in this place, with Isaac beside her, she felt like she was finally home. As they reached the top of the ridge, Isaac reined in his horse, and they both gazed out at the valley below, now bathed in the soft glow of the evening light. "This is what I've been building," Isaac said, his voice filled with pride. "This land, this ranch, this life, it's all mine, and it's all real." Quote. Helina's breath caught in her throat. There was something in his words, in the way he spoke of his land, that made her heart beat faster. She realized then that Isaac wasn't just offering her a place to stay, a safe haven from the storm. He was offering her a future, a chance to build something real with him. And she wasn't sure when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, she had stopped being just a guest in his life and had started to feel like she was a part of it. "I never imagined a life like this," she said quietly. "I never thought I could have this." Isaac turned to her, his eyes warm, and he reached over, gently taking her hand. "You've always had the strength to build something real, Helina. It's just a matter of finding the right place. And I think, maybe, this is it." The air between them shifted, and in that moment, Helina felt the weight of everything that had happened, everything that had brought her here. She had come to Arizona looking for a new life, but she hadn't realized how much she had been running away from. What she hadn't expected was that in the midst of the harshness of the desert, she would find something so warm and real. "I think you're right," she said, her voice steady, the uncertainty from the past weeks fading into the distance. "This is where I belong." Isaac smiled then, a smile that reached his eyes, and for the first time Helina felt like she could see everything clearly. She didn't need to look for security in a man or a place. She had the strength to create her own future, and here, with Isaac, she knew she could do it. They rode back down the ridge together, the darkness settling over the land, but for Helina, it was no longer a void. It was a promise, one she was ready to embrace. That night, after dinner, Isaac spoke again, his voice quiet, but filled with something more than the simple offer of shelter. "You've got your own place here, Helina," he said, his tone sincere. "You've been a part of this life from the start. I'd like you to stay. Not just as a guest, but as someone who's as much a part of this ranch as I am." Quote. Helina's heart soared as she looked at him, her chest tight with emotion. She had never expected this, never imagined that in a place so far from everything she had known, she could find this kind of love, this kind of belonging. "I'd like that," she whispered, her voice thick with the weight of her decision. "I'd like that very much." Isaac smiled, a slow, knowing smile, and in that moment, Helina knew without a doubt that this was where she was meant to be, with him, in this place. The storm had passed. The uncertainty was gone. They had both found their way home, and together they would build something that would last.